we're delighted today to have you all participate in our meeting on women in the US Judiciary. When we selected the topic for this meeting last summer, we had no idea that we would be celebrating an announcement of the first woman justice, who we hope will get confirmed soon to the US Supreme Court. We'll hear a lot more about what's happening on that front, but we also want to hear how the courts will or can be improved so that they will be more beneficial to all of us on our concerns about feminist equality. This has been a long time major concern, and our speaker that we had lined up to talk a lot about the general judicial issues, Erin Martin, is not able to join us today because she got an invitation to attend the in-person hearings today on Judge Jackson. We appreciate you all coming to this Zoom meeting and watching the hearings that are probably going to continue over lunch hour later. So thank you so much. What we'll do is we'll follow the agenda that's covered, but would the speakers, Sam and Kimberly, please try to fill in on any of the additional judiciary reforms that are needed. Of course, even if Judge Jackson is confirmed, which we hope will happen quickly and easily, it won't change the imbalance in the Supreme Court. So we have to figure out what other strategies we can use to make progressive progress in the courts, despite the conservative domination of the Supreme Court. And I had also asked Holly Joseph, our Vice President and Treasurer, to comment on latest development related to the Equal Rights Amendment.
I'm happy to. I'm doing it off the cuff, although I think about it a lot. And I will say that I think the hallmark is that there are many divisions. Now, people are ready for the Equal Rights Amendment. I think that's unequivocal, but except for the people who don't know about it and think we already have it, of course. And but there's quite a division about what the president could do, what the archivist could do, what the Justice Department could do, and that all lends itself to arguments among the supporters. And I think that that's important to know, but that many of your people are working in different directions. Anyway, we all look forward to it. I hope I'm being specific enough for you without taking more time. Suffice it to say, it's complicated, and we hope many will, and some say this is not the time because we're in a war right now. I've heard that a lot too. So anyway, or war is surrounding us. Anyway, I hope that's enough to say there's a lot of interest and a lot of interest to look forward to. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Holly. Now I'd like to let Kimberly Humphrey from the Alliance for Justice. She just joined this great organization recently and is the Senior Legislative Counsel at the Alliance for Justice. And Kim, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and then inform us about the US and the judiciary and any particular aspects as it relates to helping us with our progressive agenda. All yours.
Thank you so much, Sue, for the invitation. Again, my name is Kimberly Humphrey. I'm Senior Legislative Counsel at Alliance for Justice. I am relatively new to Alliance for Justice, but I've been in the advocacy space for over a decade. So I'm very happy to be here and talk with you about women in the courts. I do have a PowerPoint I'm going to pull up. So just the intro I've already stated. And I'll just talk about the representation, the historical representation and where we are now. So a truly diverse judiciary is one that reflects the gender, racial, ethnic, sexual orientation, disability status, and religious diversity of the nation. And that means that we have judges that are reflective of all of our diverse communities. So that's why AFJ has for over 40 years worked to ensure that our courts are filled with highly qualified, fair-minded, and diverse federal judges. Through our Building the Bench program, we work with our coalition partners to identify the broadest possible pool of candidates that are demographically diverse, as well as experientially diverse lawyers. And we make sure that all of them have a demonstrated commitment to equal justice under the law. So as I mentioned, I'll outline where the courts began in terms of women's representation and the great ways that President Biden has really heeded the call to diversity on the bench. So our federal courts and the judges who serve on them are essential to the protection of our most important constitutional rights. Unfortunately, the federal judiciary does not currently reflect the diversity of our country, particularly when it comes to women who are drastically underrepresented. 80% of all the federal judges are white compared to the US population of 60% white. Women make up more than half of our population and yet account for only 27% of federal judges. So the stats are even more drastic for women of color who make up 20% of our population, but only 4% on the judiciary. So just wanted to highlight the first, but not the last. Genevieve Rose Klein was the first woman to be a federal judge. She was nominated in 1928 by President Calvin Coolidge. And that was to the US Customs Court, which is now the Court of International Trade. Florence Allen was the first woman to serve on an Article III federal appeals court, confirmed by President Roosevelt, appointed by President Roosevelt to the US Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit. And a woman of color was not appointed to the federal bench until 1966, when the civil rights leader Constance Baker Motley was confirmed to the Southern District of New York. And in 1981, the first Associate Justice of the US Supreme Court was confirmed, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. Okay. So we know that we are continuing to see progress, although slow, as far as representation on the bench. Since Justice O'Connor was put on the Supreme Court, 3 other women have sat on the Supreme Court. Of course, Associate Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Associate Justice Sonia Sotomayor, and Associate Justice Elena Kagan. And soon we know that we'll be adding one, but there are a lot of other courts, right? And recently, AFJ did an end of the year report to look at the Biden administration's progress with putting more women on the bench. So Biden has an impressive pace at nominating women compared to the two prior administrations, and that is what these charts show. So in his first year, President Biden nominated 73% women, and that exceeded both the previous administrations. Additionally, 31 of President Biden's nominees were women, and of that 31, half of them were women of color. And of course, in honor of everything that's happening today, I also wanted to just talk about representation of Black women, and take a step back and look at the landscape overall. So the numbers are striking. There are 3,843 people who have ever served on the as a federal judge, and only 70 of those folks have been Black women. And this data is from the Federal Judicial Center. And that figure, just to be clear, it includes single race, multiracial, Hispanic or African, Afro-Latina Black women who have served on the federal courts, governed by Article 3 of the US Constitution, including the Supreme Court, the 13 appeals courts, and the 91 district courts. We also want to note, though, even though that number is stark, the number of Black women appointed to the federal judiciary has grown over time, and the Democratic administrations do a great job of making this a priority. So a little more, after a little more than a year in office, Biden has already appointed more Black women to the federal judgeships than all but two presidents. Democrat Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, who each served 8 years in the White House, appointed 26 and 15 Black women to the federal judiciary, respectively. So as of February 1st, Black women have accounted for around 24% of Biden's judges. And 62 out of 82 have been women. So that's 76% of all of his noms. So that is indeed a lot of progress that we can be very happy about. And where we are today. Just wanted to take a few minutes. I know we probably don't have to say much because there has been so much reported lately, but President Biden followed through on his pledge to nominate a Black woman to the Supreme Court. And we have the nomination of Judge Katanji Brown Jackson, which, as you mentioned at the top, the stars have aligned, and this program is following lockstep with her hearings that are happening on the Hill as we speak. She is very qualified. She's been on the bench for more than a decade, or for about a decade. I just want to get that right. But she has been a federal judge, an appeals judge. She's been on the bipartisan US Commission, US Sentencing Commission, a federal public defender, which has gotten a lot of attention, but she also served 7 years in private practice. So a very diverse background. She's been confirmed to the Senate 3 times, each time with bipartisan support. And her record demonstrates that she is fair, impartial, and that she is very committed to equal justice. So as we work to get her confirmed, we look forward to working with you all to make sure that we are making our voices heard on all of the issues that matter to you. And that's it for me.
Thanks so much, Kim. That's great. And now we'll go on to Sam. And Sam, please tell us a little bit about your interesting background before you joined the leadership conference. And then fill us in on your presentation and many of the things that we also hope that Erin would be able to share with us.
Absolutely. Hey everyone, my name is Sam Cyrulnik-Dercher. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Senior Manager of the Fair Courts Program at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. If you're not familiar with the Leadership Conference, we're a coalition of more than 220 national organizations, all working to, build an America as good as its ideals. So that's a little bit about what we do. The Leadership Conference does our work through task forces. So we have a Fair Courts Task Force. That's the task force I help staff. That's how I know lovely people like him, who we work alongside to advocate for better judges that give us equal justice, or at least get us closer to there, right? And what does better mean? That means judges who are committed to civil and human rights and who come from a wide variety of backgrounds. I won't give you the whole spiel on that because Kimberly just did that for all of us. But a little bit more about me. Before I worked on the Hill, before I worked here, first I worked on the Hill for a few years, and then I was a federal policy director at CCAS, which is a sex education advocacy organization. So I advocated for sex education that is, consent focused, LGBTQ inclusive, modern, up-to-date, scientifically accurate, all of those things. So I do have a women's rights and LGBTQ rights background. So I think Sue wanted me to brag about that a little. But I'm thrilled to be here today to talk to you all about courts. So I do not have a slide deck, but I do have about 1 billion one-pagers that I'm going to share the links to over the course of this presentation. So if there's anything that, don't feel the need to write things down, you will have resources after this if there's anything you need. I'm going to tell you about where we are right now in terms of the Supreme Court fight and the process, and then I'll get a little bit more into how you can plug in, and then I'll pivot to some of what I know my colleague Erin was going to discuss on court reform and all the many different proposals that are out there to improve how all of our courts function. So as all of you know, it's a very exciting time to be doing this work. So at the end of January, when the news was announced that Justice Breyer would be retiring from the Supreme Court, our Fair Courts Task Force immediately launched our Justice for All campaign. That's what we're calling our campaign to confirm Judge Jackson, because even before she was nominated, we were highlighting and recommending and demanding really that Biden A, keep his promise to nominate the first Black woman to the Supreme Court, and B, pick a Black woman to the Supreme Court who has a demonstrated commitment to all of our civil and human rights, who has demonstrated her commitment to equal justice, who will be a justice for all of us, who will care about the concept of justice for all of those things. So we were thrilled when just under a month ago, on February 25th, President Biden announced Judge Jackson as his nominee for the Supreme Court. I was both personally thrilled, our whole team was thrilled, I think the coalition's thrilled, folks were very excited about this because she really does have that background that we're looking for in terms of incredible qualifications, commitment to civil rights and equal justice. And of course, she will be the first Black woman ever to serve on our nation's highest court. She'll also be the first former public defender to serve on that court. She also just said in her hearing today, she'll be the first Floridian to serve on the court. So we're checking off all kinds of milestones today, but obviously the need for the first Black woman on our court is beyond long overdue. And so we are, frustrated that it took this long, but happy this day is finally here. And because of her background, especially as a public defender, Judge Jackson has seen how the criminal legal system works in people's lives, not just from the prosecutorial lens, not just from the government lens, not just from a law enforcement lens, but from the lens of how are people who are caught up in this very broken system treated. She has firsthand knowledge of that nobody else on the Supreme Court has right now. So that's crucial, right? She would be the first justice in more than 30 years to have any significant background in criminal defense, in criminal policy, and how these issues impact real people, right? The last person who had that kind of experience on the court was Justice Thurgood Marshall, and he left the bench in, I think, 1991. So we're overdue for someone with this profile. So as I said, we launched this Justice for All campaign at the end of January. And I kind of think of the nominations process in 4 big phases. So the first phase is in between the nomination announcement and the hearing, right? Everything before Monday was kind of phase 1. Monday kicked off phase 2, which is the hearing that's happening right now. Live on C-SPAN, live on the Senate Judiciary Committee website, many networks also airing it. But the goal this week is, for advocates at least, is to be telling Judge Jackson's story in the context of this historic moment, and to be letting everybody in the country know, who she is and why, at least from our perspective, the civil rights community really is incredibly strongly supporting her. And it's been a great week to be doing this work, y'all. I know Monday morning there was a rally, really more of a party at the Supreme Court. It was the first time I've ever been to a party at 9 a.m. on a Monday, but I highly recommend it. So many Black women-led organizations led a celebration on Monday. National Women's Law Center, She Will Rise, and Black Women's Roundtable all brought us all together to celebrate Judge Jackson yesterday morning. I know there's another rally hosted by Center for Popular Democracy happening at the court as we speak. There's lots of events to be plugged into because there's so much excitement across communities about this nomination. So today, yes, so much to be excited about, Melina. I see you in the chat. And especially if you've been following Supreme Court fights over the last several years, right? They've been very emotional. They've been very devastating. They've been really, really dark times for our country. So, for all the sad tears we shed, or I shed, I'll speak for myself, during the last campaign, during the last Supreme Court fight, to be able to have so much joy in this moment, I think is really, really thrilling. So today we are hearing from the senators doing their questioning of Judge Jackson. So that's been happening since 9 a.m. this morning. That could go as late as 11 p.m. tonight. We don't know. Hopefully not that long, so Kim and I can get a rest. But that will continue today and tomorrow. And then on Thursday, there will be outside witnesses. So the American Bar Association will do a panel on why they rated her as well qualified to become a Supreme Court justice. Other folks with knowledge on her record will testify. And then hopefully the goal is for her to be confirmed, over and done with, ready to put on that robe before the Senate takes its April recess. So somewhere around April 8th, 7th to 11th-ish is when we are hoping to see a final vote on Judge Jackson. So that's a little bit about the process. I have a very much longer version of the process in a kind of flowchart form that I will post in the chat and make sure you all have copies of afterwards. I am failing to multitask well enough to post the link in the chat. Give me one moment. Here we go. I got it now. So again, this is the much deeper in the weeds, detailed version of the Supreme Court nominations process. But if you see the stuff that says hearing, that's where we are now. So you can follow along through this little Candyland journey. I would also just want to highlight that last week, the Leadership Conference released our support letter for Judge Jackson, and we were joined by 186 national organizations, including Clearinghouse on Women's Issues, Feminist Majority Foundation. So thank you for that, Sue, and everyone else involved. But it is a lot harder to get organizations to coalesce around support for someone than it is for opposition. Right? When it's opposition, everybody is mad, they're coming to the table, they want to sign up. When it's support, folks are like, okay, that's great. They're generally not as engaged. So I just want to note that 187 signatures on this letter is more than we got for the Kavanaugh opposition letter. So that's huge to me, that the joy and excitement of this moment is really bringing out organizations who either don't usually speak out on courts issues or are less in the mix on this. So that's very, very exciting to see. And I know, I'm just reading along in the chat. Oh, great question, Melina. I think we'll come back to that later because I know AFJ does a lot of that work. So I want Kim to weigh in on that as well. But yes, many more organizations. So we've got at least 187 national orgs who are civil rights orgs supporting her. And a lot of organizations wait until after the hearing to announce all of those support someone. So we're seeing lots more support letters roll in this week, next week, etc. So now that you have heard about why she's fantastic and why we're all excited, I hope you're wondering how you can get involved in this fight. So I'll give you a little bit on that. As I said, I mean, there's like parties happening nonstop around this. There are different organizations even hosting virtual watch parties. Tomorrow, I'm sorry, not tomorrow, Thursday, the 24th, there's going to be an environmental day of action. So I know the climate and enviro groups will be doing a lot of online activity on Thursday. And then Friday, which is basically the first day after her hearing is done, there's going to be a national day of action, lots of call-ins and tweet storms and lots of things on that. I'll provide my email in the chat as well. If there's anything in here that sounds like, ooh, I want to plug into that, you just let me know. I'll get you the information you need. And you don't even have to be in DC for many of these things, right? There's virtual stuff everywhere. I know there's an in-person rally in Philadelphia this weekend. So if you're in Philly, I urge you to check that out. But my biggest ask for everybody this week, and this includes myself, is that as angry as we're going to get when we see the racist and sexist attacks from Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee, as angry as we are going to get over those, I beg of you, when you take to social media, when you take to traditional media, when you share your thoughts with the public, just uplift the joy around Judge Jackson, uplift why she's incredibly qualified, uplift all of what Kimberly was talking about with her almost 10 years of judicial experience and all of the work she's done for equal justice. I know it can feel really good to angrily quote tweet a GOP tweet or a Josh Hawley tweet or whatever the case may be, or Facebook or whatever your preferred social media is. I am begging you to ignore the noise and to focus on lifting up the excitement of this moment, because that's actually the most effective counterattack. Much more effective than disagreeing with or feeding into the noise of the opposition is to just show and tell people why she's qualified. So just something for everybody to consider as they move forward. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about court reform proposals. Kim, do you have something you want to throw in?
Oh, yeah. So while I'll just say, in regards to the question here, that there are a few groups, including ours. Our program is called Building the Bench. So we work directly with a range of groups across the country. And we have meetings with staff about their processes, because each state has different processes for how they put people on, how they get their candidates nominated for the district court and for the circuit courts. But I did want to say that if you have specific groups that you would like us to connect with, we are always trying to make sure that we're talking to everyone. So I can put my email in the chat, and I can also link to our Building the Bench page just so you can learn more about that. So there was something else that came up. I'll wait, Sam, if you have another part that you're presenting.
I'm going to do a little bit on court reform, but so if this is, we can talk about that now or later.
Okay, it's a small group. We'll be a little conversational and flexible.
Perfect.
So I'll just say, it was brought up, what can we do about strategies? Because, or maybe this does come after, I don't know. But basically, the Supreme Court is critical, right? Very important. But we have to remember that the Supreme Court takes 2% of cases. So our work of Building the Bench, we're looking at who's at the district level court, federal courts, who's on the circuit court. And these are the courts where the issues funnel. So I'm so happy that, as Sam said, there's so much excitement and just enthusiasm right now for the courts, but we have to use that and translate it to have more conversations and say, hey, did you know that all the circuit court panels, those are lifetime appointments as well. And it's very, very important that our progressive friends, senators, representatives, presidents are as committed to making sure that we get diversity and just good people that care about equal rights on those benches as well as the Supreme Court. So just wanted to throw that in.
Absolutely.
Sorry, Sam.
No, please. You know, I sit at that building the bench table, so I learn from Alliance for Justice all the time about who's connecting to who and who these possible folks in what we call the pipeline. You know, folks who we could see one day becoming judges or wanting to become judges. So definitely very exciting work there, and definitely want to underline the importance of district and circuit courts. It's as Kimberly said, they hear all these issues first. They hear way more cases than the Supreme Court does, but also in terms of pipeline building, right? Judge Jackson, before she got this nomination, was first on the district court and then on the circuit court. So these fights that we're having at the lower court level, they really matter for the Supreme Court eventually, because you have to pick that pool of judges from somewhere, right? So really, yeah, underlining what an excellent point that is in terms of the impact of those lower court fights that don't get the CNN and MSNBC coverage of a Supreme Court fight, but are still such an important part of the work. And really, you know, most of the time, that's what folks who work on this, like Kimberly and I, are working on, is lower court nominations, right? Supreme Court doesn't come around quite as often, although the last few years it has been a lot, but yeah, so I'd love to pivot to talking a little bit about different court reform proposals. So there are a host of reasons why the Supreme Court is not working for everybody. And so there are a host of different proposals for how to make it work better for more people, right? So I'll give a few examples of court reform proposals that you might not have heard of that I think are actually the most important. So first, I want to talk about not the court expansion you're thinking of. I want to talk about lower court expansion. So I know that the splashy topic is expanding the Supreme Court, right? Reasonable people disagree over how the best way to do that is, or whether that's a good idea, all of those things. I'll tell you, our coalition does not have a consensus view on Supreme Court expansion. We have organizations who are all in different places on that issue. But we're really glad the conversation is happening because it highlights the need for change on our courts. I will say that it's been, I believe, almost 30 years, definitely more than 20 years, since the last time we added seats to our lower courts. So what does that mean, right? At the district and circuit court level, our federal courts are, you know, doing trials all across the country. Like any other court, if you don't have enough staff, like any other job really, if you don't have enough staff to keep up with the workload, that's going to lead to some really long delays, right? So justice is being delayed and delayed and delayed because there aren't even enough active judgeships on these courts across the country in order to keep up with increased population, increased caseloads, all of those things. So I just want to underline the critical need for these courts, which, again, as Kimberly mentioned, they're hearing almost every federal case, right? Not the Supreme Court. So it's so important that we have enough seats on all of these courts to actually get the work done and make sure folks aren't waiting 3 years for a trial or whatever the case may be. So I want to highlight that first because, again, we got to give the lower courts some love. They need it, and really the people need it, because any delay on the court is ultimately, you know, a block to people getting to access justice. I also want to talk about, which I think will be of maybe most interest to this group, is the current system of dealing with harassment and discrimination in our federal court system. So that's sexual harassment, gender discrimination, but also racial harassment and discrimination, and retaliating against whistleblowers who report bad behavior. The current system of reporting harassment and discrimination, if you are a judiciary staffer, is broken. They are not judicial, you know, clerks, public defenders, folks like that who work in the judicial buildings and spaces but aren't judges. They are not protected by the same civil rights laws that apply to all other federal employees. All other federal employees have maybe not a perfect system, but at least a system for reporting this kind of misbehavior. The federal judiciary does not have a system that works. So I just want to highlight the Judicial Accountability Act. which is a bill that would change the way these issues are reported and dealt with. As Sue mentioned, Erin from National Women's Law Center was going to be covering this issue. So I like to say I know just enough about it to be dangerous, but I urge you to look more into the Judicial Accountability Act and to just be thinking more about the kinds of ethical reforms that are needed in order to make our courts more fair. Sexual harassment, racial discrimination, those things are rampant in our federal judiciary because judges are very, very, very powerful, and it's very, very hard to hold them accountable. But we see the same thing on the Hill. So any workplace that has people with that much power, I mean, we're talking about people serving lifetime positions. You can't have more job security than that, right? So I do want to highlight the need for, especially as we're talking about women in our federal courts, women in our judiciary, women, and especially women of color, are the most likely to be discriminated against by the judges they're working for or working with. So I want to highlight that as a huge problem that doesn't get a lot of airtime, but I think this audience in particular would be quite passionate about. And I want to flag one more kind of ethics issue for the court. So all lower court judges, district and circuit court judges, they all have to follow a judicial code of conduct. And if they don't, there's enforcement, there's consequences for not following those rules. Supreme Court justices don't have that. They're supposed to follow the code of conduct, but there's no enforcement for if you don't follow the code of conduct and you do something super unethical, there's nothing anybody can do about it. So desperately, we need an actual enforceable code of conduct for Supreme Court justices, right? I as an attorney, I had to take a whole ethics exam and professional responsibility exam about all of the ways that lawyers can be held accountable if they do not follow ethical guidelines. Why is every lawyer subject to that in order to be, a barred attorney, but our Supreme Court justices aren't? It's impossible to even conceive of. So there are proposals to institute a code of conduct for the Supreme Court. Some of those are wrapped up in other big democracy reform bills, but I just want to highlight that because as you read in the news about, should Justice Thomas have recused himself from this case because of his wife's political activities or other issues that are getting a lot of news right now, we need an enforcement mechanism for making sure somebody does recuse when they're supposed to. And if they don't, we have a way to deal with that. So I think I have talked all of your ears off long enough. But for us, what matters most in terms of any reform of the court, whether that's structural, whether that's higher court, lower court, what we always tell Congress and the White House on this is center the people most impacted as you make these decisions, right? Think about the communities that have been most marginalized by the criminal legal system, Black and brown communities, low-income communities, immigrant communities, lots more folks. Center those folks and their experiences in how you talk about and think about what the possible reforms could be. So happy to take questions, but I think that's everything I've prepared, at least. Back to you, Sue.
Thanks so much, Sam. Could you also give us a tiny bit of background on the Judicial Advisory Committee report that came out earlier this year?
Absolutely. So President Biden decided to start a commission on the Supreme Court to analyze this question of court reform, of all different court reform proposals. So that included what we think of as court expansion, just adding more justices. It included term limits. So instead of justices serving for life, they would kind of roll off the bench after a certain number of years. And several other proposals as well. The commission wasn't empowered to actually make recommendations, which I think was a little bit of a flaw in the system for me personally, but understand, it's good to be having these conversations regardless. But so the final report was really just what the folks on the commission thought about each of those proposals, right? And how it navigated them. It did not, at least for me personally, and I would love Kimberly's take on this as well, I don't think it shed too much light on what's possible or what is the best way forward on this. And again, as I said, like reasonable folks can disagree on that, but there was definitely, I wish there had been more focus on, like I said, how would all these different proposals impact different communities? What civil rights are at risk that could be protected if we do, you know, different considerations of reform. So so they did release a report in the end, but I can't say it's the most helpful or accessible way to learn about this. You know, if you have a commission of legal academics, they're going to write something for legal academics. So that makes sense. It might not be the most accessible if you are not a legal academic, but definitely encourage folks to continue having those conversations.
Thanks. And could you also give us the pros and cons of the Supreme Court expansion of adding 4 justices?
I will, this is not the area I have the most expertise on, because as I said, our coalition doesn't take a position on this. I can tell you a couple, but there's probably many, many more out there. Certainly there are folks who believe that if Congress now decided to add more justices, well, in 5 years, they could decide to add 5 more. And in another 5 years, they could decide to add 5 more. And so that would be, that's the sort of slippery slope argument. I don't know that that's the most realistic argument, but it's an argument that's out there. I think, you know, there are arguments that it's just not politically possible to do, that there isn't the buy-in from Congress to even do that, and it would be Congress who ultimately makes that decision. But of course, there are arguments that that I certainly strongly agree with, which is that we need to make a change because right-wing dark money groups have purchased a judiciary, right? They bought 3 Supreme Court seats in the last administration. So, I deeply believe that that there needs to be change to our court to make it more fair for more people. I don't know. I don't know if expansion is the way. Maybe term limits is the way. There's also constitutional difficulties with doing term limits. There's no one easy path to fixing all of the court's problems, right? That's why I like to talk about all these different reform proposals, so that you can see that there's not going to be one fix that we wake up tomorrow and the court's perfect, right? It's going to take all these different avenues in order to make this better.
Yeah, I'll just add that it's going to take time,
Yes.
like Sam said, but that doesn't mean that we don't focus on, you know, who's there. I see a narrative in the news that, you know, Judge Katanji Brown Jackson, this you know, the sea change, really, this barrier breaking moment doesn't really matter because she won't change the ideological makeup. Well, it's important to remember that a lot of times decisions that that aren't, I guess, so controversial are actually unanimous. And so there are a lot of things that they're discussion, right? The body is a deliberative body. And so her voice, her presence will make a difference. And so I just think it's imperative that all of us who care are consistently saying, you know, she's writing dissents, and those dissents kind of lay the groundwork for going in the direction that the country will want to go in. And so I just wanted to flag that and something to keep in mind at this moment right now. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but also call your senators, right? We know, and I think you may have heard in the news that they say, you know, she'll be fine. You know, there's just so many ways to really try to not amplify and be excited about this moment. But in our coalition and our task force, the work that Sam and I do with a lot of other partners, we are always trying to say there's no reason why this judge shouldn't get all 100 votes. This is just a remarkable moment. She is very qualified, and senators, Republican and Democrat, they're taking notes. They're tracking the support and the naysayers, right? And we want to make sure that they know it's okay, no matter, you know, what your beliefs are, that you are entrusting this person who has taken an oath and has proven to be a fair and unbiased judge, and that you can support her. And because we just think that would be just such a unifying moment for our country. And not to mention for progressives, this is something that will give us a lot of energy for the midterms. So if we care about getting more senators, not losing the House, and just seeing more of our rights protected, we have to weigh in at every stage that we can.
Absolutely. And thank you for underlying the point on, yeah, don't let anybody tell you this nomination doesn't matter. I mean, first of all, just as the first Black woman to serve on this court, this nomination matters, right? like just as a base level, but beyond that, justices serve for life. Replacing an elderly justice with someone 30 years younger than them is a change on the court, right? Just because the numbers are still 6'3", okay, but what are they going to be in 10 years when more justices have retired, right? What are they going to be in 20 years? This is generational work when our courts have lifetime seats, right? So no, today the balance of the court, or once she's confirmed and joins the bench, the balance of the court will not immediately change, but it will change over time because she could be on this court for 35 more years. Justice Breyer can't, So I like Kimberly, push back very strongly against any kind of, oh, she'll sail through. Oh, it's not that important. No, it really, it's incredibly important, and it matters. It matters.
Thank you so much. Just going back, Kimberly, does AFJ have any positions on the Supreme Court expansion?
We're supportive of several of the proposals. We do think that something needs to be done. But, we're still coming to our position with our advisors and everything else. So we don't have a formal position, but we do think that, we have to move in a different direction.
And then I just have one other general question. We'll open it up for the rest of you. The general question is, one commentary was that Judge Jackson may be asked for her views on television coverage of the Supreme Court. And I was wondering if you all or the coalitions in general had any views on that.
Well, absolutely. I think, oh, Kimberly, go ahead.
So speaking with my Kimberly Humphrey hat, not AFJ, I think transparency is a good thing. So, I know that we have some partners that have been thinking and doing more work on this issue. Again, AFJ doesn't have a formal position on that. But any time that we see sunlight on a lot of these things, for example, I wish Aaron was here, but I think one of the decisions impacting the Roe v. Wade and abortion rights issue was a shadow docket decision. And so what that means for folks that aren't familiar with the term is that it's just a decision that's put out there, and then they don't go through the analysis or they don't have the vote, the full breakdown. It's just a statement, we order this. So that's just an example of when you don't have that clear picture, it doesn't lay the groundwork or the record for future attorneys to push back on and really make the case for the change that we want to see. So I think transparency is a good thing.
Yes, I kind of in the same boat. Our organization doesn't necessarily have a formal position on it, but personally, yes, I think transparency, sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? I will say, to me, it doesn't matter if it's televised as long as we have audio of the oral arguments, which they have been doing. The Supreme Court has been doing live audio during the pandemic. And so my first question around this would, at least for the court itself, would be, are you going to keep doing that beyond the pandemic? I don't care about watching the video. I as long as I can hear it. So that's a little bit more on that. But yeah, I don't think those are very helpful questions to ask during a nomination hearing, just because, you know, it's, I think that's first of all, a lot of these things are either questions for like the broader judiciary or for Congress, not necessarily for Judge Jackson herself. But yeah, I think, as Kimberly said, right, transparency, always helpful. Sometimes senators like to say, oh, well, if you bring cameras into the courtroom will just turn into Congress. I'm like, it's just very funny to hear senators saying that. I'm like, you created the circumstances that made the Senate what it is today, Senator Cruz. But no, I don't think if you put a camera in a courtroom, suddenly judges are going to be grandstanding like they're politicians. I have no worries about that.
Thanks. Now let's open it up to others' questions. Please unmute yourself and speak up.
Yeah, I put my hand up. This is Karen Humphrey from the National Women's Political Caucus of California and also national. And I just wanted to mention that I understand from news coverage that Judge Jackson was asked about television about televising the courts, and she declined to respond in any way without talking to the other members of the court, which I thought was very appropriate. And I agree with you, it's not the most important question. The other thing is, I do think it's really important. I have no worries about California senators. I mean, Senator Feinstein just did her thing on the hearing this morning, but senators you already know are going to support her, need your phone calls and your emails, and because they keep count. And so it's really helpful to them. I'm going to take the liberty in a moment to just put on the chat some information about an event on reproductive health that we're holding in California this weekend. It's a Zoom event, and it shows the importance of the courts. And our keynote speaker is Michelle Goodwin, who is one of the nation's experts on women's health and the courts. And she is also out there fighting for Judge Jackson. So I hope that people can join us. It's open to the public. But you talked about the dark money efforts over what is pretty close to 50 years to stack the courts with people. And a lot of this is more pro-business than it is pro-social conservatism. I believe it was there was a justice a few years ago, Lewis White. There was a justice who pushed the dark money people into developing ways of bringing on more pro-business judges all through the court system. There have been books about this, there have been articles about this. How do we get the people in the general public alarmed by the fact that the direction of our courts and the direction of constitutional decisions are being dictated behind the scenes, and that we need to have a full light on these, and people need to find ways to reject that? Certainly conservatives deserve their right to try to shape the courts, but they don't deserve the right to stage manage the whole thing behind the scenes with no transparency. Thank you both very much. You've been great.
Of course, and as a former theater kid, I love the stage managing. I think is a great metaphor. I will push back a little bit on one thing you said. While it is true that they mobilize the business community as the people who would be leading this charge, it absolutely has to do with social conservatism, because the reason they started this 50 years ago was because suddenly schools weren't segregated anymore.
Yes.
Right? Suddenly Black children had rights that looked more like white children. That's why this started. And that's even before, like, a lot of people will tell you this comes down to Roe versus Wade, and it does to a certain point. But truly, this has been happening as a reaction to Brown versus Board of Ed. That's where this started.
You are right. There's several.
So yes, it is the marriage of social conservatism, business conservatism, all of those folks together who have wrapped up into exactly what Karen's been talking about, the last 50 years of court packing at every level. And truly, you know, that's why I'm in the work I'm doing. My job every day is to tell people, here's what has happened to our judiciary. Here's why, first of all, it wasn't built to work for most of us. It was built to work for white men who owned slaves. That's who the judiciary was built by and for, right? That's just part of our history. And so to pretend that there's no effects of that left, right? Or that didn't happen for a reason and by particular players who have continued this trajectory of trying to protect whiteness and wealth through the judiciary, that is still a very real issue in our country, that we and our organizations are constantly trying to figure out ways of how to explain that in a way that's relatable to people in their lives, right? Most folks, it's hard to even grasp the concept of what federal courts are and do.
And I would just suggest that one way to do that is to talk about working families. That's why the public defender, the idea, that being very clear that public defense is a job, right? And so as they try to say that you're just representing the worst, and, there's a lot of, even when you talk about habeas, that word, it scares people. I don't think they really know what it is, but it's essentially getting innocent people out of prison often, or out of these long-term sentences when they didn't have the right representation. So, I think we would invite you all to continue to be engaged with us as we create campaigns to make sure that people are aware of these issues. But yes, equal rights for all, not just the wealthy and the powerful. I think that's something that we should just make a part of our vocabulary, because people understand that, and they will, understand that when you have, justices and judges who have been in law firms representing a lot of corporations, and that's the typical profile of a lot of the judges in the past, that, that's what we're trying to push for, a broader range of backgrounds, then they end up, sometimes having more of a bias towards corporations. So as long as we are just very clear with people about why experiential backgrounds are critical to the makeup of the judiciary, I think we'll start to allow people to understand the full picture. So we'll have to jump off in a second. But Sue, thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you to everyone who joined. I probably need to connect with Miss Humphrey just because we have the same name. And I grew up in Southern California, so happy that you're doing that work out there. But to everyone else,
we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks so much, Kimberly and Karen Humphrey. And for Karen Humphrey's event that she just announced, those of you who are CWI members, look at your latest newsletter, and the event and the web link, or the Zoom link, are in it to see Michelle there. So we encourage any of you who aren't yet members to join, and encourage others to join. And we're also looking for organizational members to join CWI and help us decide on what presentations and topics we should cover in our most recent, in our new and next series of meetings.
And I have to say, if you have not had the opportunity to listen to Michelle Goodwin speak, I had the thrilling opportunity to host her on a panel that the Leadership Conference did with National Council of Jewish Women. And we had her talk to us about kind of the history of reproductive health issues in this country. And I mean, when I tell you she blew everybody's mind in that room, she's so powerful and incredible to listen to. So just a extra plug for anytime Michelle Goodwin talks, I want to listen.
And a good candidate for a future Supreme Court appointment.
Yes, she's yes. Personally, again, putting my Sam hat on, taking off my org hat, I agree with you.
Yeah. And before we go on to other questions, while we're on the topic of future meetings, the future meeting of the April 26th meeting of CWI is going to be hosted by our co-president, Connie Cordovilla, and it's on stopping the school push out and school to prison pipeline. Connie, do you want to say anything more about it?
Yes, I'm very excited to be working on this topic. Last year, at the end of May, the Virginia Now group I'm the president of had a webinar about this issue and how important it was, especially to Virginians. And it's an amazing fact when you look at the statistics about how discriminatory the system is in education towards people of color and other marginalized people. And so right now I'm gathering people. I just sent a thing to Sam to ask her if she had anybody working on her staff on it. And I'm hoping to get a hold of Alexis Krajewska, if I've said that right, who wrote the prison pipeline report for Georgetown Law Center. And I'm working on getting Dara Baldwin from Disabilities Community to speak too.
Dara's amazing. That's a great pick.
Well, Susan, I've known Dara for years, but I always think of her as a friend and I don't ever connect the other stuff. And then finally, someone from the LGBTQ community. And I thought I'd talk to Erin about that at your place. So.
And yes, I know we work on education issues. I will find out who at the org is the best person to connect you with.
It would be fab. Okay.
Thank you. Are there other questions, comments, suggestions? Well, I want to thank you, Sam, so much for even filling in on Erin's part of the scheduled presentation. It's very important for us to know how we can make the courts work better for civil rights, equity issues, progressive issues in general. What we as a public and informed activists can do. So keep us filled with advice and links and things like that.
Always.
Great. And thank you so much. Unless there's any other comments or suggestions, we'll adjourn this meeting, and thank you all for attending and helping us learn and do better actions to improve our society. So thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you all so much for having me.